Over the past 50 years, Crosspoint has endeavored to make San Antonio safer and stronger by empowering its most marginalized citizens to lead more productive lives. We are currently working with formerly incarcerated men and women, homeless veterans, and people who have substance abuse and/or mental health problems.
We never doubted that this would be successful. We just assumed it would be a successful institution. We were creating an institution, something that didn't exist in San Antonio and existed in very few places in the United States, so we were free to develop it as we wanted in cooperation with the counselors from the state hospital. And they thought it was successful.
We helped only mental health people back in those days. That's where we were getting our money. And then the MHMR Center came in, and we started working with them. But it was strictly mental health people. To show you how committed we were, we signed the mortgage, because there was mortgages on 3 houses at that time, the Goldsmith, Pryor House, and Cortland. But one night, Goldsmith was the president, and we all sat there and signed the mortgage. And when I went home, my husband says, "What did you do?" And I said, "Well, you know, I always wanted to live on Main Street, so if anyone defaults, I'll live on Main Street." But it was just one of those things that whatever it took, we did it.
But the activity with our hands, or creating the program, dealing with the personal and social adjustment training, hiring the house parents, dealing with this lawsuit over Pryor House, finding Pryor House, and then buying the third house, which became known as Blackburn House, was from 1965 to 1970. And it was very interesting. I mean, you don't get that kind of opportunity very often, because we were bringing something brand new into existence.
There was no format, nothing that had been done in the past as we had done. So we were really stepping out on faith. We didn't know anything, but as we moved forward, doors began to open. People became involved, and I think that's what you have to do, is involve people. People helping people.
In 1972, the organization's board of directors felt that the transitional residential services being provided to their mentally ill residents would also be appropriate for formerly incarcerated citizens returning to San Antonio. These services included support system development, vocational assistance, life skills classes, budgeting, and assistance with the procurement of permanent housing. These residential facilities are commonly referred to as halfway houses or residential reentry centers. The first reentry center, named Blackburn House, was opened that year in Tobin Hill, providing residential reentry services for 35 formerly incarcerated citizens returning from state and federal prisons.
I think being able to tell the community that these are people who now have a job, are paying taxes, are not takers from the community and the crimes that they committed and end up in prison. They have a place to live. They paid for part of their stay in the program. They paid 25% of their gross earnings, had a savings account, and they rekindled or developed some new ties in the community. Relationships are the critical issue to people really making it. Somebody that really believes in you, and you can make it.
It's so much better to have someone transition out with some controls on them, rather than just opening the prison doors, giving them a new suit, $10 and a bus ticket home, because they go right back into the same environment that they came out of. This way, they can go into a halfway house or into Crosspoint and get themselves adjusted, get themselves settled in employment, and make a much easier transition back into the community. We tend to see a lot lower recidivism rates when people do that than just being thrown out the prison door.
Frequently our staff, we went to federal prison, we do what was called a pre-release meeting. We'd meet with the inmates, And when I did it, one of the things I always started off with, I mean, because I would always sit around like, what are you going to tell me kind of thing. And I could always sense the ones who wanted to try and do something about their lives. Maybe they didn't, but I sensed that they were agonizing over it. I'd say, when you get up in the morning and you look in the mirror and you don't like what you see, I invite you to come to Crosspoint. I can't promise you that you're going to be changing. I can promise you that you'll have a safe environment and the opportunity to change. And you can just see the minds turning, and in a number of these real tough guys, they were disgusted with their life. And here was somebody not only holding out some hope, but even an expectation that if they came there, they're going to make it.
I had a fellow one time, and this was while I was a probation officer. He'd come out of Leavenworth, was placed in the halfway house, and I thought the first time that I read his file and looked at his background that this guy's going to be a disaster. There's just no way he's going to make it. The guy did very well. He was assisted in finding a job as a maintenance man. He later advanced over time and became the maintenance supervisor for a large motel chain here in town, and just did miraculously well. But I really attribute that to the 6-month period of time that he had in Crosspoint, getting himself established both in his employment. It just gives you great satisfaction to see someone who you think, this guy he's not going to make it, he's going to wind up being put back in prison, and he did just the opposite. He just fared very well.
Looking at past leaders of Crosspoint, such as Richard Goldsmith, Helen Austin, Paul Beaver, and Lee Davila, I appreciate that they built something out of nothing, that they created this organization with their own hands. I know that anything I have accomplished in my years as CEO has been done standing on their shoulders.
Case that I remember the most involved a young man. He was born totally deaf. And his parents, I think, were ashamed of him, and he didn't leave the house. He was kept in the house until he was about 20 years old, and then his parents died. There were no institutions, no places for him, and the state hospital took him, but to be in the state hospital, you had to have a diagnosable condition, and I don't know what he was diagnosed as, but he was just deaf. That was the plain and simple fact. And he was there for another 20 years, so he was about 42 years old when the state hospital inventoried their patient population and discovered here is a deaf man who does not belong here. Well, I don't know what would have happened to him if the halfway house had not been available. But anyway, he came to the halfway house. He'd never been across the street. He'd never been to a supermarket. He had no language. He'd never had a job. He was placed at Goodwill Industries, and within 6 months, he was the rehabilitee of the year for the entire state of Texas. And then he moved out and lived on his own. And I do not know what happened to him, but he was a success.
One thing we have heard consistently from past leadership is that Crosspoint must be nimble and flexible if it is to continue meeting the changing needs of San Antonio. We have proven over the last 50 years that we can modify our client populations and programs while continuing to accomplish our mission of making the community safer and stronger by providing our clients with the opportunity to become independent, productive citizens. In 1985, then Executive Director Paul Beaver and the Board of Directors saw that a modified transitional residential services model could be used to assist homeless veterans living on the streets of San Antonio. While these individuals did not have criminal justice supervision requirements, they did need a structured environment that provided much the same transitional services made available to our reentry clients. The first Crosspoint Veterans Facility was opened in the Goldsmith House just north of downtown.
Well, I think Crosspoint is especially effective in in working with veterans as far as rehabbing them, for those who have had mental health issues, including substance abuse, PTSD, depression. They have a setting where each individual gets their own room, and they have counselors that work with them as far as their psychosocial problems and also their employment problems. And it's just excellent case management down there. Let me tell you a little bit about Ned Mays, who's a 13-year veteran of the United States Air Force, proudly served his country. After several years that he had gotten out of the military, he had started using a lot of alcohol and ended up on the streets for 8.5 years. And at that point, he was referred to the Crosspoint Goldsmith House by a nurse from the VA hospital, the Healthcare for Homeless Veterans program. And he became a resident of Crosspoint, the Goldsmith House, on February 1996 and completed his stay on July 14, 1996. Following that, he went into the VA supportive housing program. So the effective case management and motivational counseling were instrumental in helping him to continue mending his broken life. His stay at Goldsmith proved to be the most important step in his continuum of care on his journey from where he had been to where he is today. He was living a life of homelessness and addiction on the streets of Skid Row. Today he celebrates over 16 years of sobriety. He has a healthy spiritual life and is very active in the church. He's a productive member of our community. He's financially sound and is no longer a burden to society. Now, unfortunately, he has had bouts with cancer. He's got throat cancer. But Ned fought through it and has not succumbed to that vice. He's just done amazing.
Over the last 5 decades, Crosspoint has been faced with recurrent opposition when we are opening a new facility. Interestingly, the opposition frequently commends the work we do, but feels it is not right for that particular neighborhood. We have opened transitional homes in neighborhoods with differing economic conditions, population densities, and levels of business development. The common factor in all of this is that those living around us have grown to not only tolerate us, but embrace us as the good neighbors we are once they get to know us.
We had to expand the house because it wasn't big enough. But even before we could begin the expansion, the neighbors sued us, asserting that we would be a nuisance. And there's no such thing as an anticipatory nuisance. But nevertheless, this case went to trial and we won it. Thereafter, we opened the house. And I think the neighborhood has forgotten completely that house is there. We're probably better residents of the neighborhood than many of the other people in the vicinity. And there, as far as I know, there has never been an incident created by the residents of the prior house.
We have served over 15,000 San Antonio citizens in our residential program since opening our doors in 1963. That means that thousands of our graduates are living as productive members of the community in neighborhoods throughout the city. As a result of going through Crosspoint, they have become better spouses, parents, employees, and neighbors.
I think it's important in terms of taking care of people who really wouldn't have any other outlet except when they're in Crosspoint, they have a structured program and they're on the move. They either have to be in school, working, or living well enough to live independent, but they have some structure in their lives, and I think that's a difference. I wish we had more Crosspoints, because you see a lot of people just wandering around, but they need structure in their lives, and that's what we always tended to do, was to put some structure there and help them to set goals for themselves.
Halfway House has evolved into Crosspoint. It has changed from a mental health institution for the most part, exclusively, to a criminal justice institution, and it's now dealing with the homeless. I gave a talk to the board at an annual meeting in 1995, in which I commented on that I regretted that it was no longer focused primarily on mental health, but that it should be focused on the homeless and their mental health problems. And now it is, to some degree, if not largely. And things will change, but residential institutions which provide a safe environment for people who need safety and rehabilitation will not go away. So I don't know what will happen in the future, but it will change. And I think they need good minds and courageous board members to shepherd that evolution.
After decades of little fanfare regarding Crosspoint's good work, we've begun to more openly share how our services make San Antonio safer and stronger. By providing services focused on accountability, graduated community reintegration, and opportunities for personal growth, San Antonio's most disenfranchised citizens are able to achieve personal success and independence. For the last 50 years, our volunteer board of directors and paid employees have toiled for those who have no resources or advocates. In the process, they have witnessed firsthand how compassion turned into action can help those initially deemed to be a societal burden become a community asset. While Crosspoint services will never result in a successful completion rate of 100%, we will be there to provide a safe environment and opportunity to change for those who want to get their lives in order. If we can provide the hope, opportunities, and resources to help these individuals become well-adjusted, productive citizens, we have not only served them, but we have made our city a better place for all of us to live.
I think when we stop and look at the future of Crosspoint, I mean, I obviously worked for them for a long time, and it holds a very deep and important spot in my heart. And I know that the organization, if it's going to succeed, things change, and they need to be ready to change. What are some different possible funding opportunities that are going to be out there? What's going on in our community that the needs are not being addressed? And can it be met through a combination of residential and non-residential services? What can they do, and to be very alert for those kinds of things? More than alert, I think to be aggressive in searching it out. Because certainly nothing's forever. And in our day and time, with the economy the way it is and all these different programs getting cut, there's no reason to say that the Federal Bureau of Prisons is going to release people into a pre-release program. They might just discharge them and discharge them early. So we don't know what the life is, and I would hope that both from the leadership at a paid level, the CEOs, and the board of directors will be very assertive in their looking for future funding and things that complement their existing mission, and maybe even considering, is there another mission out there that we can do? We can provide services for the community, make San Antonio a better place to live. Because we certainly have done that to this point in time. There's just no question about it.
I am honored to serve as the CEO in an organization where for so many years, the staff and leadership have seen service to the least fortunate among us as both a privilege and a commitment. As San Antonio continues to grow and change, I am confident that Crosspoint's relevance will not diminish if we continue to serve those citizens who want to make it, but need our guidance, compassion, and commitment to push them over the top. We will always strive to work for the betterment of San Antonio, but in order to accomplish this, we will need the continued understanding and support of our many neighbors and friends. To all of you watching this, I ask you to please join us in this effort.